everybody, Danielle Egnew here. Welcome to inPsight Radio, where you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. Hi! How are you, gang? I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful week this week. We've had so much going on, and there's so much happening in our world right now that I really sincerely do hope that you are taking the time to just sink in and to be able to relax in your life a bit. Finally, spring has sprung here in Montana. I'm so excited. I can't hardly stand it. It's so amazing. So here we are having this incredible spring, and you'll probably hear a little bit of wheezing on the show today. I do have a little bit of hay fever, and everything is starting to bloom. So if I sound like I'm breathing through a cheesecloth, man, I'm sorry. It is what it is. It's spring in Montana. There you go. I am so excited for the show today. We've got a great show. It's super interesting today. We are talking about aliens, hostile aliens, grays. We're talking about spooky monsters. Are they real? I love it. I love it. I love this stuff because the reason that we tend to believe in dark, scary things is that there actually are dark, scary things out in the world. And hey, you know, that's part of life. We have beautiful light, and we have gorgeous, cute, fluffy puppies and really cute kittens. And we do have scarier, darker things that lurk around in our universe. Now, do we need to focus on it? Do we need to make it our obsession to go after everything dark? Well, yeah, apparently we as humans do. Apparently, we make a lot of fuss over dark things. Yet really, if we were to drum up a percentage in our three-dimensional realm of light beings versus dark beings, what we'd be coming up with there is a lot of beings that are, well, quite frankly, much more light than dark. And we have some gray area beings as well. So, I mean, I'd say there was really only maybe 35% of beings that walk the planet of Earth come from a dark place, have a dark agenda for usually a reason. I mean, now keep in mind, gang, we have to have plot arcs. Okay, we have to have something to move the lesson machine along. So if everybody was coming in as Cinderella and Prince Charming, we'd have no one to move the lesson curve because human beings are still obsessed with learning through contrast. And again, I say this all the time. I'll say it again. We humans are one of the very few species out there that actually truly engage with, well, quite honestly, with lessonry through contrast, gang. We are the ones that have to burn our hand on the stove after we've been told, don't touch that, it'll burn your hand. Will it? Ow! Other races are like, oh yeah, okay, that's a bad idea. I'm not going to do that because they don't really want to waste their flesh. We're still a flesh wasting species, gang. So really, today we're not even talking about dark humans. We're talking about actual monsters, things that fall in that we would consider falling into that 35% of dark beings. And some of these things we're going to bring up today aren't necessarily dark. They just don't have the same modality that we humans have. And again, we're a very light-based creature. We're a very light-based being. So it's important for us to stay focused on what is light and what is dark. We get a little caught up in that. However, it's really important to note that when we're dealing with, quote, monsters, we're oftentimes dealing with beings that we don't understand. And because we are a biological mammal, humans, we come from a tribal mentality of, don't understand, that must be bad, blah. And we tend to demonize or monsterize certain things that we don't understand. So today we're going to be talking about animals and beings that we consider to be monsters, yet actually, when we get right into it, they aren't. So, some of them actually are. Some of them are real-life monsters. Most of them aren't. However, a lot of them don't operate in the way that we would. So we see that as a negative or spooky. And I'm going to start with the grays, our infamous grays. You gotta love the gray aliens made famous by X-Files. Oh, I love X-Files. Are you guys watching? Are you watching the new X-Files? It's still really, really good. I love X-Files in terms of Well, in terms of what they brought forward, a lot of what they brought forward on X-Files in the 90s and early 2000s was true. They were bringing forward a lot of true weird stuff. Chris Carter, who was the creator and writer of X-Files, had his finger on the pulse of a bunch of weird stuff out there. And I think also Chris Carter is probably also a very intuitive or psychically perceptive person, because he came up with some incredible stuff that's very true. So go Chris Carter, go X-Files. I love the X-Files so much, gang. No kidding. I kind of had a weird sideways crush on the character of Dana Scully, because she was just so serious and so compressed and so complicated in there. Oh my God. I actually wrote a song called Scully's a Lesbian, which is way off topic here. But if you get really bored, you can go to YouTube and you can find that video. It's under Pope Jane, Scully's a Lesbian. Anyway, my old band. Yeah, I'm full of really fascinating facts, aren't I? Anyway, back to grays, gang. So back to grays. Gray aliens are something that have frightened us for a long time, because when we hear about the abductions, we associate those with the grays. Now, grays are not the only beings that abduct people. Yet grays are the most rudimentary of all of our off-world cousins to abduct people. We have many other off-world cousins out there who can actually literally remove a person from their sleep, not disturb their sleep, check out what they need to check out in the energy field of that person, and return them. When we talk about the grays, we're talking about a race of beings that are more like the Nazis experimenting with people in concentration camps. And why do you think? Why do you think that the Nazi regime, in spite of the fact that it was one of the most dark and occult-driven, grotesque, in my opinion, bastardizations of the capacity for humans to channel and mirror dark energies, it was just, ugh. When I feel into the Nazis, that is a monster. Seriously, that whole entire thing is a monster. So we human beings can create tremendous monsters that are really ugly and really terrifying. And we've got to watch that propensity in us. We really do. That gets frightening when we become these heinous beings. So the Nazis would take people, human beings, out of their concentration camps and run absolutely disgusting tests on them to see if they could advance medical science. And I won't get into a lot of that here. It honestly is so grotesque. It is so inhuman. It is so icky that as an empath myself, when I feel back into that frame of time, because I'm so wired temporally, I'm wired to experience all space-time at one time, which is a real pain in the butt for my wife if she's trying to get me out the door at a certain time to go see a movie. But it's really helpful when you're doing readings for people. It's not so helpful when you're looking back in time to the Nazi regime, because I'm literally getting absolutely nauseated even beginning to talk about it. So I'm just going to skip to the surface of this. Yet the only reason I'm even bringing it up is that the Nazis would do things like cut off a finger or an arm from a twin and try to swap the fingers and arms and see if they would immediately fuse back, or they would literally inject dye into people's eyes to try to color them from brown to blue. I mean, and just blind the people. I mean, it was just hideous, hideous, hideous what they did. And that's not even getting into other really grotesque medical experiments that were really gross. And one would think, who would even think this stuff up? And yes, we as human beings, are we capable of such ugly grossness? Of course we are. Yes, we are. Yet the reason I'm even bringing up the Nazis is the Nazis were in tremendous contact with the Greys. The Nazis were building something called the Nazi Bell, that was a bell-shaped craft that worked on anti-gravity technology, and they got that technology from the Greys, and they were trading the people to the Greys like crazy for experiments, and the Greys were allowing them to observe what they were doing with people in their experimental capacity. And obviously the Greys have better technology than we do, not a whole lot better, but they do have better technology than we do. So the Nazis came back and said, wow, well, if these big off-world beings who are far more advanced than us with their technology are cutting people open and they're doing all these things to them, then we should too. And you can Google all kinds of stuff about Nazis, occult, UFOs. I mean, there's all this stuff that was burned in the bunkers with the Nazi regime, and they didn't want it getting out that they were working with these off-worlders because they didn't want other people out there working on the same technologies they were. So they never did perfect the Nazi Bell, which again was a craft that could get up and fly like a spaceship. They could not control it, yet they did get it to levitate. They simply could not stabilize it to control it enough. And it kind of flailed all over the place, and they would have to chain it down because they weren't sure if they could control it to bring it back down. So again, the Nazis are actually at the top of my list of monsters, and that consciousness goes right up there, yet they watched the Greys experiment on people. So when we think about aliens abducting others, we think about gray aliens. And again, many of the Greys get their base genome from Otur. So what I want to explain here is that the Greys were much more like a religious version or religious cult that got together and began blending genome from some very prominent, I don't want to say species, don't do it, Danielle, don't do it, very prominent groups of off-worlders. And their goal was, just like the Nazis' goal, was to create a superhuman. Their goal in the gray realm was to create the perfect alien being who didn't have to eat, who didn't have to use the resources of the body to reproduce. Greys reproduce externally. They have the technology to grow a fetus externally because they're trying to actually slimline the body's functions. And ladies, let's think about it. I mean, we're equipped, whether you have children or not, ladies, we are equipped to grow life within us. And women who have been pregnant, you know what it feels like. You've got literally, I mean, this is kind of harsh to talk about a baby this way, yet if we're just going to strip this completely down to the way that a gray would look at physiology, okay? A baby is a parasite. It's a parasite. It eats your minerals. It eats your blood. It eats your flesh. It eats your proteins, and it extracts from you as it's forming. The Greys felt that that type of reproduction was inefficient because it took away from the power, the energy, and the physical mojo that could go to the brain. So in the Greys' genetic design of themselves, and they didn't immediately look like these little bobble-headed things with little skinny necks and whatnot. That came later. Yet they even augmented their skeletons. We'll get to that. The Greys were obsessed with being perfectly streamlined as a race, to be able to share one thought at one time, to be able to not have to have a million different emotions, to have one shared emotion, one shared objective. They are individualistic, yet it's not important for them to be individuals as much as it's important for them to actually be part of a bigger collective or movement. Again, think like a religious cult here in America. That's the best allegory I have. Or analogy, really, it's not an allegory. It's the best analogy I have to tell you about why the Greys did this over time to their bodies. So they spent a ton of time engineering really huge bulbous heads because that frontal cortex and those actually the Greys are very heavy on that limbic system, the middle part of the brain. So are the folks from Utur, and that's where we as human beings, it's our limbic system, the middle part of the brain, that we connect to universe through the crown chakra. So we're able to telepathically connect through that limbic system. Well, you look at a gray, and they've got these huge bulby skulls that's mostly limbic. You know, a little frontal cortex going on there, but it's mostly limbic system. So they are operating on a highly telepathic system that really works as one body. And we, as humans, that scares the dickens out of us, right? We're like, oh my God, it's the Borg, it's a hive mind. Well, to us, we're highly individualized. So that freaks us the flip right out, right? For Greys, that is nirvana. That's a place of peace. That's never, ever being alone because you are with your community of the race that you're with, and you always can share this collective process of understanding. So they also believed that every gray themselves could actually go and become a channel for God or universe if they linked up to one another. If you think about those planar arrays, have you ever seen those big radar dishes in the middle of the desert? And SETI has a whole big planar array down there in the desert. And when SETI used to be in full operation, it would hear some mysterious communication out in the universe, and that entire planar array of dishes would go ahead and turn, and it would link onto these particular communications. And the more, well, the HARP array also is a planar array. The more dishes that you have in an array, the higher and stronger its ability to actually absorb information. So if you think about millions and millions and millions of grays, each one being a radar dish, their original thought process was, if each one of us becomes telepathically connected, then we can send consciousness out through the universe. We can send messages to and from the all or the creator or God. We can become a portal for higher being, because we as a society can then become a giant planar array and broadcast messages. And as most three-dimensional beings start out with a great project, which is supposed to have a great end for everybody, this went sideways, and just like a lot of great intentions do. So here we had this entire incredible opportunity of these grays to become a conduit, a mass consciousness planar array with millions of antennas, being a conduit for peace, love, harmony, and light in the universe, to the obsession with the power that came with that. Because I got news for you, humanity. We're not the only species that falls into the trap of hubris. We aren't. And keeping in mind that even though the grays extracted and came from Otur, in part originally, and other realms out there, they were fanatics who were noodling with their genetics to be able to extract what they considered unnecessary function out of the body to make it all about the focused consciousness. So they took out having babies. They took out chewing and eating and having the body digest particular different foods. Grays absorb through the skin. They absorb nutrients through the skin, and they absorb it through mists, which is why you'll see them on Earth, but they'll be wrapped up in all kinds of things because our environment is actually very toxic for them. It's very toxic. They've got these great big giant bulby eyeballs. And the reason being is that they felt that it was a better idea to never actually have a planet, because a planet takes gravity. A planet can wear out your telomeres on the ends of your chromosomes. And the telomeres are the little ends out there on your chromosomes. And when they wear off, you die. So actually what wears off our telomeres, everybody? Let's say it at one time, the 3-syllable word that actually is the sole cause of aging. Gravity. That's right. So if you eliminate gravity, okay, are you following this? If you eliminate gravity, you are not wearing down the ends of your telomeres because there is not as much wear and tear and resistance on the body. So the Greys decided it would be a much better idea to literally just constantly live on craft in space, to live in these huge, if you want to call it a Death Star or a Borg cube, but to them it wasn't this evil thing. They're not trying to take over other realms. They just wanted to live in a lighter gravity environment, which again is why you don't find them walking around Earth a lot, because our gravity, if they sustain themselves here for a long time, is enough to just smash them flat like a bug. They have very, very light skeletal systems, okay? So here's the other part of that. The Greys have successfully figured out how to make an extremely hard skeletal system out of really, really lightweight material. This is super cool, actually, by fusing actual bone mass with synthetic fibers, with nanotubes in essence. I mean, our nanotube technology is just barely beginning to catch up with the technology that the Greys have used to fuse into and to genetically create this bone system that we would consider part synthetic and part organic. So they have very light bones. And we actually have, this is so cool, we actually have some evidence of this structure of the bone, which I think is phenomenal in what's called the Star Child skull. And I've touched on that on other shows. The Star Child skull is a skull that was found down in Mexico, and it was found in a cave with, we're assuming it's the mother of this being. And the Star Child skull contains fascinating, really fascinating components of human DNA and some synthetic stuff that we don't even know what it is. And when they ran the DNA on the Star Child skull, it came back that the mother was human and the father, they had no idea. They had nothing on the charts for the father's DNA. So this woman was impregnated, probably abducted and impregnated, had this baby that had heavy gray genetic traits. Even the way the optic nerves come through the eye sockets are not human. I mean, the whole thing is different. So when you think of the eyes of those grays, those great big bulbous dark eyes, they exist in very, 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 very dim light. That's another thing. Why have all this energy run to an eyeball whose iris has to expand and contract? Well, you only do that if you're living in a light variant environment. So if you think about our earth creatures, our nocturnal animals here have humongous eyeballs, right? So that's just part of genetically engineering an eyeball that can see in the dark. The eye needs to be bigger. It needs to have a big, big, big pupil that's just open all the time. And when we do see grays here, oftentimes they're wearing funny eye goggles. They're wearing funny masks over the eyes because our sun is way too bright for these guys. And they oftentimes don't come out in the daytime anyway. That's one of the reasons that grays abduct people or did. They're really not doing it anymore. But they abducted people at night because the sun was extremely harsh on their skin. So, I mean, that's the physiology that we're dealing with here. The grays abducted human beings from, I would say probably going back to the 20s all the way through till the early 70s. And the reason they were abducting people is that in their zealousness to create this body that didn't need to bear children, that didn't need to process food and use those resources, that didn't need to go through the same type of emotional yield that other beings do. And human beings, listen, we get really emotional about things. That stresses the adrenals. That stresses the pituitary gland. It completely stresses the thyroid. We get stressed and the body takes a hit for that. So the grays also genetically noodled out a lot of the same emotionality in their genome to get rid of it so they could just focus on this big, massive mental and energetic connection with one another, again, with the good intention of being a channel for consciousness. And then it just got to be fanaticism and obsessiveness. And of course, you start eliminating genes and variants in a person, and you end up, or in anybody, in anything, and you start taking out the good traits too. I always say, if you genetically modify a tomato to get rid of the gene that creates a smell in the tomato because the bugs are attracted to the smell to eat the tomato, you're also eliminating the gene that takes the taste out of the tomato. Have you ever gone to just a generic grocery store back in the day, like, whatever, generic grocery store on your corner, and you buy a tomato and it's woody and it's weird and there's no flavor to it, and it will stay good in your refrigerator for about 14 years? And you're looking at this and you're like, why is this tomato? Like, it's nuclear. What's going on? They've genetically modified the tomato so that it stays good on the truck longer, so that the people growing the tomatoes do not have losses in their product line, which is why it's so super important, America, for us to grow our own food and to grow our food from organically derived seeds, not from genetically modified seeds, because those tomatoes also are missing a great amount of their nutrients. So you're eating basically a cardboard tomato, and you're buying this cardboard tomato just because it'll stay good in your fridge for an additional who even knows how long. And now we're just into like Stupidville. Like, why are we even eating? I might as well eat the cereal box. Remember that 1970s, you guys, those of us who are 49, we remember the health food craze in the 70s, where the lady would come on TV and say, make sure your kids, and what was with the 70s accent? Make sure your kids are eating proper foods. If you're feeding them these sugary cereals, they might as well just be eating the box. There's more fiber in the box. Do you remember those commercials? Oh, God. Because of that, I got grape nuts, lady. Thanks a lot. You ever feed a child grape nuts? That is the most joyless cereal. I mean, I can hack it now and as an adult because I can handle the absolutely great the roof of your mouth off texture and the bitterness that makes you just want to sob and throw yourself off a cliff? Grape nuts. God, they're probably not that bad as an adult. As a kid, I had to eat them with honey poured on top. That was my big treat, which actually I'm very grateful to my parents for not giving me the food full of corn syrup that we now know is completely does not allow brain tissue to hook up. Maybe I have these gifts and abilities because I ate other cereal. I ate grape nuts. Who knows? Who knows? Yet again, I digress. So back to the Greys. The Greys were abducting people because they needed to harvest genetics out of our cells, out of our eggs, especially women. Sorry, women, we got it with the worst. We were getting all sorts of women being abducted and their eggs were being harvested, and men, sperm were being harvested. And the Greys were trying to reintroduce into their own line some of the genetic traits that accidentally got erased out when they were trying to create this perfect collective telepathic consciousness society. They ended up getting rid of some immune issues. So the Greys themselves now are a dying species because they've not been successful in reintroducing the genome into their bodies that would help stabilize their species. And in part, it's because they overnoodled with the genes that would have attached to those particular, the bridge genes that would have attached to the genetic code that we can offer them to bring back in this incredible immune system. So the Greys are a dying race, and they are subject to all sorts of disease. They're subject to all sorts of frailties. They do not handle radiation well, even though they keep themselves up in space all the time. There's a lot of radiation out in space. And again, they noodled everything out of their genomes, so their immunity is just poor. They still are this big hive mind. They still do their thing, yet they're not abducting human beings at near the breakneck pace that they were. During the 30s and 40s, that was a big hot time for them to be abducting humans because they thought that they were very close to finding a way to bridge back in the DNA to their bodies to be able to give them just a basic longevity as a species. And that's one of the reasons they were working with the Nazis, because as we know, the Nazi regime was as gross as it gets, humans. That's as gross as it gets in consciousness. Ugh, that reflection of dark in this plane, that imitation of darkness is pretty gross. So the Greys interfaced a lot with them, which is where you get the medical experiments. And so for us as human beings, the Greys are huge monsters because they don't have the same emotionality that we do. In fact, the Greys don't have emotionality, period. They just don't. They are such a cold cucumber. Oh, man. They give me the creepers, and I try not to be like that because, again, that's so racist to go, ooh, this race of beings gives me the creeps. Yet I have to own it. I have to own my limitation here. Their vibe creeps me out because there is no empathy there. They are all mental capacity. Now, there are a few Greys that have throwback genetics that have that ability to empathize a little more, and they generally would send those beings on the abduction parties because those beings were the ones that would, you hear stories of abductees of one of them put their hand over my eyes and I could hear them saying in my head, it's okay, you're going to be okay. The okay, you're going to be okay, that is not the drill for most of the Grey civilization. Most of them are like, we're sorry that this is uncomfortable. However, your sacrifice is for the highest good. Thank you for your time and your egg and your sperm. They have no capacity to understand that when they put a human being back who's been snapped up into the air and strapped down with no painkiller and had their eggs and sperm ripped out that in a very not good way, and when they put them back, they have no capacity of understanding why that human being is now damaged because they themselves don't have that capacity to be damaged. I mean, anymore, you kill one Grey and they're like, oh, well, I guess that's one less radar dish. What a shame. You know, they're not like, oh my God, there's a life of a being there. So the throwback Greys would go on the abduction parties and would try to communicate with the humans the best they could to say, you're going to be okay. It's all cool. Don't mind that giant metal thing up your butt. It's all good. You're really helping us out. Sorry, it's cold. We love you though, man. Woo, taking one for the team. I mean, how do you justify that? So the Greys themselves, and I don't interact with them all that much, but periodically I catch them in transmission. And I do have an off-world bandwidth. I have an off-world frequency that I pick up off-worlders on, and the Greys will come in. And I just used to kind of be a lurker with them for a long time. I wouldn't really engage them because, quite honestly, as embarrassing as this is to admit, they just creeped me out. I'm like, you guys are creepy, man. You're going to come stick something up my butt. I don't like you, weirdos. Oh. But as I began to understand more of what their society was about, eventually I started to weigh in on the Grey channel, just to start some conversations, mostly after I determined that they no longer were abducting people, because I'm not my mama didn't raise a completely stupid doorknob over here. So once I figured out they weren't snapping people up anymore, I was like, well, maybe I'll have a conversation about where you guys were coming from. And that's actually why I know the stuff that I know, because I've chatted these guys up a lot about who they are, what they were trying to do, what their deal was, et cetera, and so on. So the Greys, I have a lot of compassion for at this point, because as a collective, and there are millions and millions and millions of these beings, as a collective species, as a collective race, they have determined and accepted at this point that their demise is imminent. It's because of what they've done. And they've accepted from an intellectual standpoint that them's the price of science, right? Right there. You get in there too much and you can overnoodle. So at this point, the Greys are really doing a tremendous amount of focusing on consciousness. And they're doing a survey in the universes. And I say universes because there's not just one. There are many multiverses out there. And they are working actually as a collective to try to factor in harmonization. I would say peace, but peace is too much of an emotional language for them. Harmonization amongst a lot of the dissonance that's out there. So the Greys kind of went from being a monster to this sort of floating group of Buddhist priests, for lack of a better way to put it. And I don't mean to insult any Buddhist by that. Yet they are focusing on consciousness. And they do try to do what they can to elongate their species. And because they've stopped trying to harvest genes and go after other species of anything to try to make their race better, the group on Otur, which much of their genome came from, is actually reaching out and trying to help them a little, to just at least be part of something that is an emotional, loving, collective, to be connective in that way. The Oturan were kind of embarrassed, for lack of a better way to put it, about the Greys because they carry so much of their genome, and so many of the Oturan gave their bodies to become, part of this civilization. And I mean, I shouldn't say they're embarrassed because that indicates shame, and quite a number of these off-world civilization that are millions of years old, they've given away shame a long time ago because, as we've discussed, shame is a destructive energy signature, right? So it's more like they're, the equivalent would be an eye roll, the Oturan eye roll if you bring up the Greys. It's just like this, oh, Lord, okay, yeah, those guys. And it's how you feel when any country has a history that is so ugly. I have so many German friends that are fabulous, and then you have the ignorant American that says, hey, you have any Nazis over there still? And you just get the German eye roll of, oh my God, do you know how many years ago that was? We're not even that country. What are you talking about? But every country must deal with the lineage of horror that some of their people have brought forward. And for the Oturan, that's the Greys in part, mostly, So that's the deal with the Greys. You guys don't have to worry about getting abducted by them. They're not abducting people anymore. They do visit Earth. They do visit people whose genetics they have noodled with. They feel it's their responsibility to go back and check on them. They are unaware of the fact that that's freakishly pee down your leg terrifying if you're a human being. They still don't get that part because a lot of their empath sect is an extreme minority for them. Or what you could even consider sort of kind of the empath sect of the Greys, which really barely exists. So if you do get visited by the Greys, they really aren't here necessarily to harvest your stuff. It's likely that someone in your family line has had some type of genetic merger with them. We took on their genetics way easier than they took on ours. So there were instances and still are instances of women being pregnant with hybrid babies, and they just took the babies because a lot of what's going to carry the Grey lineage genetically is a Grey human hybrid. And as creepy as that sounds, that's really the case. And those children oftentimes are raised by the Greys. And so the kids, these human Grey hybrid kids, are raised by the Greys, and they introduce a great amount of empathic behaviors back to the Greys. So as inhumane as it sounds to steal a woman's baby that's half human and half Grey, in a weird way, in the karmic cycle of things, those human traits are going to be delivering a great amount of empathy and good traits back to the Greys. And the Greys have to really work with those humans to not get territorial and do, my toy, that kind of stuff. That gets a little rough for them. Yet it teaches them non-singular consciousness. So I don't agree with anyone's baby being stolen, just understand that. Yet it's fascinating when I see the big picture about how all of that is working. So they're not doing it anymore. But if you do get visited by a Grey, chances are somebody in your family has some Grey genome and they just want to check up on you. So that's where they're at. There are other alien races out there that aren't as kind. We hear about the reptilians. And honest to God, gang, look, there's a difference between digital broadcast distortion that shows up on a TV signal and distorts someone's face as they're speaking on the news, and someone being part, what do you want to call it, reptilian, and changing in front of people. There are all these blogs about Obama turned into a reptile on TV, or, Ann Coulter turned into a reptile on TV, and okay, whatever. But the fact of the matter was, that's just digital distortion in the broadcast signal, and it pixelates people's faces. There is, though, a race of more sleestacky reptile-looking beings out there. They are violent. They are conquest-driven. They are mean. And they and some of the folks from the Sirius AB star system got together years ago and became the Anunnaki, which then genetically modified small groups of human beings to be easily subjugated. By moving our C1 and C2 vertebrae, it puts pressure on the spinal column and spinal fluid so that our mojo wouldn't flow as much as it should, and it it makes us tired, lethargic, easy to control. Those beings are no longer doing that on Earth, yet you can see some really fascinating footprints of the reptilian, they don't call themselves reptilians, but the reptilian species out there, or races. God, I got to stop with that. The race of reptilian beings out there, you see evidence in that all over the world with upright dragon beings down in South America, in the Asian countries, and even you see these weird snake people and creepy alligator people down in Egypt. You see remnants of the same type of beings up in Russia. And so they were all over the place at a certain time. They really don't do a whole lot with Earth anymore because their hands were slapped in essence by, if you want to call it, a galactic council, which there really isn't a galactic council, gang. Yet there is a consciousness amongst off-world races that have been around for millions and millions, and some of them billions of years, that you just don't noodle with indigenous life. It's just an agreed upon thing. Like humans, we just agree that it's just absolutely disgusting to molest children sexually. That is just ooh. That's something that comes up with most people as being really inappropriate. So the galactic races have that same ooh reaction to noodling with races and beings that are not quite up to speed technologically and genetically and whatnot, to a large degree, especially for subjugation. A lot of these races have done that and left starseeds out there for positive reasons. For subjugation, it's a no-no. So yes, we do have those icky reptilian beings. They were carnivores. They did eat some people in front of other people. So that lore got passed down. So there really are creepy, scary things out there, yet many of them are not interfacing with the Earth anymore. There is a race of off-worlders that wear these black cloaks, and they're small. They mostly come in through the poles, the South Pole and the North Pole, because their craft cannot handle the resonant dissonance of the Earth's atmosphere. So they've got to come through higher geomagnetic areas, higher indexes in those areas where they can actually land. And that's why Nome, Alaska is one of the hottest abduction areas, because these beings can come through in that area and they still snap people up. And they use, and this is icky, and these beings are almost interdimensional. They're multiverse rather than from a different planet. They come from a multiverse is where they come from. And they snap people up, and I'm not even sure what they do with them. I try to stay off those guys' radar as much as I possibly can because they are creepy. The feeling that I get with the abductees is they take them and they're either for sport or for play, or like we would catch rabbits and put them in a cage. That's kind of the feeling. So those are actually creepy monsters that are interdimensional beings. And mostly we see them as aliens, and they're usually hanging out in the Alaska corridor. So sorry, Alaska, watch it. They're weird. They're weird beings. And they have a lot of the same gray technology. So they do wear cloaks, though. So it's very difficult to tell what these things look like. I can't even see them when I try to key into them psychically. And honestly, I try to stay off of those types of beings' radars, because if I can see them, they can see me. So I just take little bitty side glances once in a while at what they are and who they are. And from what I can tell, they are interdimensional beings, and that makes more sense because our third dimension, housing all these galactic races, don't believe in stealing other beings for sport. So these beings are coming from somewhere else, which bridges us to our next topic, which happens to be interdimensional beings. Here on Earth, you've probably heard of the Jersey Devil. That's a real being. It is an elemental, and it comes through the geomagnetic vortexes in the northeastern part of the United States, in part because of that iron-based granite bedrock that's very, very prevalent in a lot of that incredible space down there. So we've got this whole thing going on, which is intense. And what I think is fascinating about that is that we've got evidence of the Jersey Devil, and it is kind of weird, horsey looking bat wings, all these things. People have seen it. People have been picked up by it. People have found weird fur pieces that come off of its wings. That is an elemental that comes through those vortex points in those big deciduous leaf forests, And in the ground over there, there are some limestone caverns. And as we know, limestone does convert electromagnetic energy and become a big conductor. And this was the area of the country that when our original settlers popped over here in the super early 1600s, this was the area where we were asked and told not to settle by the Native American populations. They literally said, you don't want to go out in those woods. That's sour ground. There's things out in those woods that will eat your lunch. And of course, the, religiously arrogant white people were like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Really, darling, we've got this. We've got God on our side. Where's my child? Apparently it's been eaten by a Jersey Devil. Oh, dear. So, we've been told by the indigenous populations, don't go in there. So the Jersey Devil, what we call a Jersey Devil, is a nature spirit or an elemental being. And part of what they do is keep people out of those vortexes. Because you can wander into a vortex and not even know you have. And all of a sudden, you're just walking along talking to your friend and you're on the top of a mountain. And you're like, what the hell happened? That's happened to people. And we want to blame it always on aliens abducting someone and physically moving them, yet our planet has a ton of vortex holes all over it, and especially in certain pockets of areas of the United States. So the Jersey Devil is definitely a real creature, and you see that up in that same thin vortex area in the Northeast. And what we also find up there is in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, we find Mothman. And the Mothmen are interdimensional beings. They're not aliens. They are interdimensional beings. They're temporal beings. They see all time and space. And they come through space-time to actually be able to see, if you want to put it that way, what's going on in our space-time. They were very heavily occupying the United States in that particular realm of the country, because keep in mind the vortex points lend themselves for easy dimensional crossing in the Northeast. Haunted forests out there, seriously, gang. Bell Witch, come on. I mean, Bell Witch is more south, but I mean, you've got the quote Blair Witch, which was taken off of the Bell Witch mythology, which is actually, the Bell Witch is a real thing. It's a nature spirit. It's an elemental. That's more down south. But if you look at the eastern coast of the United States, especially the Northeast, we have a lot of vortex doorways there. So the Mothman were coming through in the 60s, and about the same time that we were dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were dealing with a potential nuclear war in our quadrant of reality. And make no mistake, gang, every time we blow off a nuclear weapon, we split atoms. We end it's bad. We end up affecting like a ripple other dimensions when we blow this stuff up. So there's a reason other dimensions don't necessarily do that. And sometimes they do that, and it comes to our dimension as a lot of rage and anger. So that's a different topic. How do we affect each other interdimensionally? That gets weird. But anyway, Mothmen are interdimensional beings, and they are real. And for a great amount of what we saw, those were suits that those beings put on to be able to navigate our particular atmosphere. Because especially, think about it, gang, New Jersey in the 60s? Before any Environmental Protection Agency stuff was out there, that was just plumb filthy in the air and in the water. So the Mothmen would, cover themselves up and make sure that they weren't going to get poisoned to death. Another creature that's actually real is what we like to call El Chupacabra. And again, that's an elemental creature, the goat bloodsucker. That's a real being that it's an elemental. It's in the Fey realm, and they dwell primarily down in the Southwest. For the same reason that the Mothmen, who we haven't seen in a while, actually, they haven't been around in a while, but the Jersey Devils are still out there in that Northeast area. And the Chupacabra are down in that bandwidth of the Southwest, because they are busy with those particular vortex portals, and they just do better in heat. So that's the El Chupacabra. That's a real thing. Again, an elemental being that goes through those vortex doorways. So we're just not seeing them, hanging out every single day, because they don't hang out every single day. Then we get into our real mythical creatures. Yes, Vlad the Impaler was a real person who killed people by impaling them, by sticking spikes up their rectums, actually, and letting the body pull the person down, the weight of the body, over time, and it would kill somebody. And Vlad the Impaler was insane, yet we've got the Vladimir the Dracula, Dracul. That came from, obviously, Vlad the Impaler. Vampires, as we have made them into mythological creatures, gang, preternatural beings that skulk around in the dark and and the sun dissolves their skin, and they turn into a bat at night. And of course, that was a Hollywood thing. However, sucking blood to live. Obviously, a vampire, as we've made them mythological creatures, though as romantic as they are, they don't exist. I've never been able to find a vampire ever on any bandwidth. However, look at all the actual traits from other real live beings we have harvested to create the mythological vampire. El Chupacabra is a real elemental that sucks blood to eat, okay? So there's that. Then we've got our grays, which can't actually get in the sun because it just bakes their skin. They can't do it. And we've adopted that piece into Dracula, who can't get into the sun, or, all of a sudden, he bursts into flames. Or unless you're Twilight and you sparkle in the sun. Ugh. I was not a fan of those movies. I apologize to any Twilight fans out there. The minute the vampires started sparkling, I was like, too saccharine. I can't do it. Sparkly vampires? Come on, man. Anyway, so apologies to Twilight fans. So I see how they've harvested different types of beings. The bat wings, Hollywood took the bat wings, and Hollywood just probably made that creepy because bats fly around at nighttime. However, Jersey Devils are reported to have bat-like fleshy wings. So I find it fascinating that our collective consciousness as human beings have gone out and found real beings out there that we actually do know are real on some capacity, on some level of our consciousness. We know that those beings exist. And then we have gone ahead and harvested different parts of those beings to make the vampire. So vampires as we know them, no, I've not been able to actually ever find a real live actual vampire, just like I've never been able to find a real live werewolf. And we all know that, there is that disease that makes people grow all the hair, and there's extreme bipolar swings that can be agitated by moon cycles. We also know there's a condition that gets that people get crazy when the full moon comes out. So that's a medical issue. So I've never been able to actually find a person who changes specifically into a wolf. I can tell you, however, that we adopted that mythology from actual shape-shifting fae or elementals that do shapeshift like crazy. And I've seen shape-shifting elementals. I've seen them do it. So that's actually fascinating to me that we create these mythical creatures based upon actual phenomenon that's existing in our third dimension. And then because we've created these fictional characters that don't actually exist, then we go back and we draw negative correlations. Well, Chupacabra doesn't exist then. And because a werewolf isn't real, then there's no Jersey Devil. And because Dracula isn't real, then there's no Mothman. And I think we do that as a collective human species, quite honestly, to put some of our fears to rest, gang, because that's scary stuff, a weird interdimensional being that flaps around and can lift you up and is huge in the northeast corner of the United States of America. I mean, that's scary stuff, right? So it can't be real, right? Of course it's real. That's why X-Files lasted 50 million years on TV, because the collective consciousness watching these shows then understood, there's some truth to this. Especially the government part of it. That's a whole different show. Another thing, Loch Ness Monster, the plesiosaurs that flapped around back in the day. There are those very large creatures in large bodies of water still. And they do live primarily in underground water caverns. They do come up to breathe air. They stay away from the surface. They stay away from our boats and our crafts, scare the dickens out of them. Yet, even though the Loch Ness Monster was somewhat of a hoax, obviously it was a hoax initially, they have found really weird skeletons at the bottom, and they found all kinds of really bizarre things like fins and photographs of fascinating creatures. You've got Ogopogo, which is the big monster in the lake in Canada. You've got the sea monster up here in Flathead Lake in Montana. And there is a creature that's got kind of a weird elongated horsey nose look to it that's actually up here in Flathead Lake. I go swimming in Flathead Lake, but I don't go swimming on the east side of the lake where the depths drop to 300 and 400 feet down there. Like right away, they just drop right off. I don't go swimming up there. I go swimming on the really, really shallow edges of the lake, and I figure if something's going to eat me, then at least I've got a chance to scream and yell at the people on the side there. But I can feel large creatures out in that lake, and Flathead Lake is huge up here in Montana. It is the largest lake west of the Continental Divide. So it's giant, and it's a naturally occurring lake that's super crystal clear, and you can just see the bottom, and it's glorious to swim in the summertime. It's absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. Google pictures of Flathead Lake, Montana. It actually looks like that, gang. Okay, those aren't photoshopped. It looks like that. I love going up there. My wife and my daughter and I get in our camper, and we just go and play in the lake and hang out. It's phenomenal. Yet there are a couple of very large sea monstery creatures that live over there. They just mostly stay to the east side of the lake. So we spend a lot of time on the west side of the lake. Makes me feel better. Now it's time for some fun parafacts, paranormal facts. I've been missing this at the end of the shows because we've run out of time. But here's a few fun parafacts for you. Salt. You hear about salt, right? And salt, people salt their windows or their doors, trying to keep out demons and elementals and ghosts. Here's the thing, gang. Salt keeps out spirit life, and it can keep out lower vibration beings. Not all demons or lower chaotic dark beings are going to be chased out by salt, but it does work pretty well on negative entities that are formerly human, ghosts. If you want to salt your doorway, it will keep out very weak, lower vibration beings that do walk with, like people who fall into a meth addiction. There's a lot of darkness that walks with that meth. And so salting a doorway or whatnot, it makes it very difficult for the dark stuff to come through with that person who's struggling with that meth addiction. I've actually even watched people come up to a door that has been salted underneath of the door jamb, and people who have real severe meth problems, they just recoil they can't see the salt, it's under the door jamb, yet they'll recoil from the door and just take off. So salt doesn't get rid of everything. It has no effect on elementals whatsoever, yet some chaotic darkness, and it's pretty good for ghosts. Why? Why does salt work? What's the deal with salt? Well, it's not that it's salt, gang. Salt are crystals. They're tiny granular crystals. And so when you're pouring that salt down, those granular crystals contain the energy signature of the intention of you pouring it down there. So you're literally pouring onto the windowsill some really interesting, tiny, intentional barriers that are stored within the salt. And what do we know about salt water, gang? Well, here on inPsight Radio, we like to talk scientific facts, and salt water is the largest conductor of electromagnetic energy on the planet, right? And in part that's water, but it's the salt in the water that really gets that going. So that salt that you're pouring out as you have that intention of, I am asking dark or chaotic beings to not cross that barrier, that is that intention that's placed within the salt. Now, elementals are not under the same rules as some of our other spirit life, because technically speaking, they're not spirit life. They're not spirits. They are actual physical beings that can cross dimensions. So the salt's not going to necessarily do the same thing. So if you're trying to get rid of, quote, negative elementals by salting your doorways or your windows, you're probably not going to have a lot of success with that. I would recommend instead, if you have pesty elementals, you can usually tell a pesty elemental because your stuff goes missing all the time. You may have cabinets slamming. People mistake poltergeists for elementals. Just weird vibes in the house at weird times that don't feel like a person, and it almost feels alien, but it doesn't quite feel like an alien. That's when you want to be planting, you want to plant flowers, you want to plant herbs, plant something in your yard that gives back, like a fruit tree, or plant some basil. Elementals love basil. Holy basil's great. Plant herbs in your yard, give back to, plant any sort of plant that yields fruit or that has a bloom on it or a blossom that is beneficial to bees. Just FYI, a lot of the plants that you'll get at, say, larger big box chain stores are genetically engineered to kill bugs so the bugs don't eat them, so that the bees go to pollinate those flowers and they die, which is one of the reasons why we're having so many deaths with our bee population. So just so you know, when you do go to plant something in your yard to waylay a nasty or mad elemental, make sure you're not planting a flower that will kill the bees, because the elemental affinity for bees is enormous. They help our ecosystem so much, and that's what elementals are here to do. So that's just a little fun parafact for you today. And this week on World News, we've got our president, of course, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Trump pulls out in break with Europe allies. Don't worry about that. Basically, everybody in the world is just trying to weather out this very strange piece of American democracy and a very difficult to negotiate with president. Even Kim Jong-un, who I think is interesting. North Korea frees 3 U.S. detainees ahead of Trump summit. Everybody's just trying to get off of this guy's radar until he's gone out of there. Most of the world is fairly confident that our United States justice system will remove Trump from the presidency before his term is up. Quite honestly, gang, man, I was seeing them just racking up evidence, and they still have. I am not confident at this time that the powers that be will actually remove President Trump, no matter how much evidence they pile against him. There is such a fear of what that would look like to the rest of the country. And so the jury is still quite out. Mueller is amassing all of this, Russia stuff. And obviously, gang, yes, the Russia stuff is real. And yes, we in the United States have also affected fake news and all that. Yet specifically with the Russia involvement, it is real. And it's not that Vladimir Putin loves Donald Trump. He just knew that Hillary Clinton was going to come in and smack him down with a ton of sanctions that were going to go on and on and on and on. So it's not that Putin is a Trump fan. He does what's good for Russia. And he's been doing that with Brexit. He's been doing that with Syria. It's just what he does. It's just what Russia does right now. So, regrettably, I can't say that I'm seeing that we're going to have any great big get the hook and get Trump out of there. For those that don't like the president, for those that do like the president, you're going to be happy to know that it doesn't look like they're ripping him out anytime soon, although they are going to be bringing forward legal action. And what we can watch is that our president loves his children very, very much. And Mueller knows that. And so Mueller's going to be targeting more of the kids. And when that starts to happen, that's when Donald is he's going to have it. He's just going to say, you know what? To hell with this. You can have your stupid presidency back. I never wanted this thing in the first place. You've been witch hunting me and my kids, and I don't want to deal with it. So it really looks more like him stepping out or stepping down than somebody raking him out at this point. But these timelines are changing very quickly, gang, I'll tell you, because our consciousness is changing quickly around all of this. So it's very interesting to look at. It's weird. And it is kind of weird for me to actually watch our system of justice start to fail in America because of fear. So it'll be fascinating to watch and see what happens with this. But as far as us and our standing in the world, gang, everybody's just looking at us as a country right now going, wow, that's a crap show. That's how the rest of the world sees the United States right now. Whether you're a Trump fan or not, they see us as internally rocked right now. So it's gonna blow over. All this is gonna blow over, and we're gonna look back in the history books and go, oh, that was such a weird time frame, wasn't it? With like every day was a new tweet and a new weird breaking news. My God, I'm 49 years old. I've never heard so much breaking news. And the breaking news is always boring. Somebody's getting indicted. Somebody's this, somebody's that. Eventually, yes, the law will catch up with everyone, and they will present all of the guilty parties. Yet I do see a hitch at them actually pulling off, taking out the guilty parties because there's so many of them, gang. This just isn't about Donald Trump. And I'm telling you, I'm not necessarily a Trump fan myself. I didn't vote for the man. Yet I can thank that guy for bringing forward such shifts in consciousness so quickly. My God. I mean, he's done his part, he really has. And it's not going to end up good for him at the end of any of it anyway. So he's going to end up taking one for the team in consciousness. Yet right now it just looks very chaotic. So, all these headlines about these deals and, this deal and that deal. And the one good news is that I'll tell you, Kim Jong-un thinks that our president is nuts. When I look inside Kim Jong-un, he's like, you know what? I just play a nut on TV. That guy's completely crazy. And I just don't even want to be on his radar. I'm going to let him fall off the radar, and then I'm going to go back to playing the nut on TV. So, in a weird way, it's kind of working out for the world temporarily that our president is so unhinged. And I could do a whole show just on what's going on with President Trump. I'm staying out of that arena somewhat because I think it's so self-evident, gang. I mean, honest to God, if you turn on the news, you see a 70-year-old white guy who had a very blessed / entitled life, and his worldview reflects that. He's been able to completely craft fictional. He's been the emperor in his new clothes for such a long time that he doesn't understand why Washington doesn't work that way. Washington, D.C. has been its own emperor in its new clothes for such a long time that it's offended by the new emperor with its new clothes saying, no, my invisible clothes are better than your invisible clothes. And I can actually believe my invisible clothes better than you can believe your invisible clothes because you have actual constituents to relate to. And I'm a TV star and I don't really care. So I'm just going to do what I do because I'm getting more ratings in my mind. And of course, our president never wanted to be president, gang. He never did. He never wanted to be president. That poor man just wanted a TV show. And I was talking about that during the elections. I'm like, this guy doesn't even want this job. He's going to be hating life, man. But anyway, so that's our weird world news for this week. And I want to encourage all of you to keep an eye on my website, because I am getting ready to launch in September my National Ascension Tour. So I can be coming to a city near you. If you would like to hear me live, deliver angelic messages, channel what's going on with the up-to-date moment in that world news, as well as angelic messages for the time frame we're in, as well as being able to give personal one-question readings to a few lucky folks who I think up to 20 we're going to try to take at these events, and just see what we can do there. And folks are going to be chosen randomly for that. However, I'm so excited to bring this consciousness and this section of teaching to you in your town. And just as a bit of a spoiler, our first two cities starting in September are going to be Portland and Denver. Those are our first two cities. And we're looking at spreading back out then across, all the way across. I believe Milwaukee is on there. I believe Philadelphia is on the list. So I'm going to be posting up on my website a link to an upcoming Ascension Tour website where you can buy tickets for the events. And gang, tell your friends about this, because this is going to be the coolest opportunity for us to get together and create a collective healing environment. I'm going to be channeling all of these angels and also bringing through collective wellness and collective healing in the room. So folks who are open to that receive those collective healings. And obviously we're not, promising healings from cancer or whatnot. We're talking about being able to activate the vibration in the DNA when we come together as a group to create healing vibrational circles or wellness circles. So not only will you be receiving on this Ascension Tour incredible heads up about the time frames that we're in, about what we got to look forward to in the world, but also you'll experience the resonance in that angelic ether, which is really, really cool. And I'll be able to actually get to some readings for people and deliver some amazing messages. So check out pretty soon. It's not quite up yet. It will be ascensiontour.com, but check out my website, Danielle Egnew, EGNEW-advisor.com to get your tickets. We're doing a limited number of venue tickets at a time because I'd like to be able to spend more time with the people that we're reading for. So we're going to be doing, just boutique events initially. So you're going to make sure that you want to get those tickets. We also have VIP tickets when we only have 40 of them per event, where folks can buy that. You get into the incredible event, which is about 3 hours long, free. Well, not free. It's with your ticket price. But then you get an opportunity to go after that to an after party and a meet and greet with me, which is fun because then we can just sit there and talk about grays or whatever. And I can actually meet you and talk to you and have a good time and spend a little more individualized time with everybody. So we're only offering 40 to 50 of those tickets per venue, just to make sure that I get a chance to say hi to everybody, because we don't want too many people there, because then I don't get a chance to say hi to everybody. So what's the point of a meet and greet if you don't actually get a meet and greet, right? That's completely lame. So anyway, gang, I'm super excited about my Ascension Tour. Keep an eye on the website, and just note going into this week, take this knowledge, share it with people. There is nothing we need to fear in this incarnation. Even though there are some scary monsters out there or things that we would think of as monsters, when you get really down to it, they're just very different than we are. And the less we demonize that which we do not understand, the more we begin to completely open up the scope of who we are. So gang, I'm way over time. I've got a panicked engineer here, but I just wanted to get all that in for you because I haven't got the Parafax in or the weird news in lately. So next week, we are going to be talking about world changes. What's to come in the future? What are our coastlines going to look like? What really do we need to worry about with our global augmentations that are taking place? Is science predicting accurately, or is this honest to God just a lot of freaky, weird, false flag stuff to get us mixed up? Or is it both? So tune in next week to really get a handle on what's going on with our world changes. And we're also going to be talking about love. How does it actually heal the body? How does it work? And how can we actually turn that on in ourselves every day to get rid of things like autoimmune diseases and to combat cancer? How do we actually, what practices do we put into play to make that happen? So gang, again, thanks for sticking with me. We're super over time today. I love you all, and go have an empowered, non-fearful week until we meet up again. See you next week.